Audrey, for being here. This is your book was wonderful, um, and I have to say that for me, my first question for you is, how long did it take you to write this book? Because it seemed like it was a running diary that you just were keeping, and then suddenly you realized, oh, this is a book.
You know something, Angela, I did not intend to write a book when I came to Paris. I thought Trump would be gone in the first 100 days. When he wasn't, I said I have to do something while I wait this out. And that is really, well, actually, I had done a piece for the Huffington Post on leaving America. And it got so much reaction, it went viral. And that was the point at which I thought it might be, my experience could be a book. So that was the genesis. And you're right, I was writing it as I was living it, which is something I'd never done. I knew that I wanted it to be out before the election of 2020. So I would say it took me probably 2.5 years to actually write it, because at the point I was finished, the campaign was gearing up for 2020.
Yeah.
So I'm a reporter. I'm used to writing on deadline. To me, 2 years was not a long time. I mean, I think that's well, for me, it's an average time for doing a book. But I'm not a novelist. I don't spend 20 years, working on a novel.
No.
Or even an epic book like Cast, Isabel Wilkinson, who's just an impeccable reporter writer. That was a 20-year undertaking. I don't do those kind of undertakings.
Yeah, well, it was a very lively and interesting read. And one of the things that I liked the most about it is how you snuck in all the history for people who might not normally be interested in history. That was really awesome. Your writing style is wonderful. Let's talk about the book a little bit. It starts that you arrived in Paris the day before the inauguration.
Yes.
You were one of the many people who said, if Trump gets elected, I'm leaving the United States. And I don't know how many of those people actually left, but you did it. How hard was that to get together, like to just pull up stakes? And
I didn't pull up stakes entirely. I kept my apartment in Brooklyn. I closed up my real estate office in Brooklyn. And because it was so surprising, and a lot of people doubted that I was going to leave, that became its own impetus.
yeah.
Audrey's not going anywhere. I'm a Taurus, and I go, yes, I am. But I had friends in Paris, including Jo Lowry, who's sitting behind me. I'm in her apartment. She was my college roommate. So she'd been here. She married a Frenchman. I had another friend who's been here, retired professor. He's been here 20 years. So I knew people. I knew enough people that I could come into a community where I don't speak the language, but I would have help. I would not have done it if I did not have Jo and Bob. I'm very clear about that. Especially at this age, if you're not working and getting to know people, I didn't have a job. So I came because I knew people. And I had a little bit of time in Paris, loved the city. I love the French, I love the expat community. So to me, it was a logical place to be, to wait out what I call the American nightmare.
Right. Well, and it's still going on. So yeah, so we still have to keep fighting. You mentioned that you knew a lot of people, and that in the book you wrote about being in Paris before, like in the 90s, and or was it in the 90s or in the early 2000s, or both?
When I tried to retire here.
Yeah.
Before Trump was even, a thought. But what happened in 2007, the euro against the dollar was so great, I couldn't afford it.
Yeah. Those were hard times for people with dollars. During that time, I worked for the government and over in Europe, and the exchange rate was horrible. So yeah, you made the right decision not to do it, because you would have probably lost about 30 to 40%
Oh,
of
yeah.
the value of your money coming at that time. Let's talk about the Women's March. You participated in the Women's March, and that was your first sort of protest ever.
Yes. And my friend Joe, who's been marching since we were in college, who's marching against the war in Vietnam. I was never a marcher. I wanted to go to the March on Washington when I was 16 in 1963. My parents wouldn't let me go. They thought it was too dangerous. It was too costly. I'm from the state of Washington. It was too far away. So I kind of lost any desire to march after that. But I knew the march was going to happen. Joe, I knew, would be there, and she talked me into going with her, which was literally the day after I arrived in Paris. And I was so glad I did. It was just one of these momentous occasions that was, inspiring and galvanizing. And, it made me reflect on my generation and the struggles that had come out of the 60s and the 70s. And it was great to see the younger generation, the Gen Xers and the millennials, carrying on the baton. And for me, I understood the big connection in history. I'm a student of history. My undergraduate degree is in history. And as a journalist, I've always understood that history connects the dots, that you have to understand what went before to get a perspective on what's happening now. So I've always enjoyed making those connections in my writing. And the march did that on a big scale. It was a global march. Women were marching all over the world. There were people all over the world at the march in Paris. So it was very exhilarating, and it just made me understand that struggle is eternal. We will always have warriors from every generation, which for me was very gratifying to see.
Yeah, it was very gratifying. I'm glad you got a chance to take part in it, for sure. I have to say, I just have a list here of the chapters titles, and they're so good. Did you make all those chapter titles yourself?
I did.
Yeah.
It's funny, I talk about history. I mean, I remember being in high school and I did a paper. I don't even know why I did this paper, but I did a paper on the importance of titles.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you were ready, because these chapter titles were awesome. I'm just going to read a couple just in case of our audience hasn't seen the book. The prologue is Taking Off. Chapter 1, Punking Out in Paris. Onward Marching Sisters, that talked about the Women's March. Babes in the City, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. D'accord. I loved D'accord. That was a chapter that you wrote about learning language.
Yes, learn a language at an older age.
Yeah, and so do you speak French now?
No. I really admire about the expat communities that everybody speaks another language: French, German, Russian. I met a Black woman who speaks Russian. I'm so impressed by that, because Americans are just so monolingual, and to me it makes us culturally illiterate. We're just cultural illiterates because we don't speak another language.
That is true. You wrote a lot about that, and it really, for me right now, I'm working on taking a German language exam for B1, and I can't give up or something, but it really resonated, like, oh my God, why are you doing this? Yeah, learning a language, although I've known German for quite some time, but I've just never taken a test for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I feel you with the language learning. There was a section that you talked extensively about the Black Soiree events in Paris and the various community. Could you talk a little bit about the Black community and their evening events and get-togethers?
The Black Soirees was created by Patricia LaPlante Collins, a Black American from Atlanta. She'd been living in Paris when I met her at least 30 years. And she started out doing twice weekly events. One on Sunday was just a social event for people to get together, newcomers to Paris. The one on Wednesday were networking events for people who wanted to make connections, maybe wanted to work. And she ran them for 20 years, and it was so impressive. It was a great way to meet other expats, Black, white, otherwise. I was a speaker at one of the events, which was also great because she wanted me to talk about why I left America. And it was just a gathering of, I think there were 8 Black Americans. There was someone from Belgium. There was someone from Africa. And she was just an interesting woman, and we became good personal friends. And I went back to America, and during the time I was back in America, she passed away. She died of a stroke in her apartment, which was, you know, for me, I considered her a girlfriend, and I said she was the first girlfriend I lost in Paris. But it was wonderful knowing her, and her events were just quite wonderful and copied now. I mean, there are millions, not millions, but dozens of meetup groups in Paris. She's the one who started it.
Yeah, your descriptions of all the people that you met and interact with, all the interesting African-American expats, it makes me really like Paris, like want to be there, you know, because I live in Germany, and I don't think there's anything like that here. You know, there's tons of African-Americans here, but we don't have this sort of community.
Yeah. Well, Paris has the history of Black Americans going back to World War I, when Black soldiers fought side by side with French soldiers and encountered a kind of freedom that they had never experienced in America, and wrote about it in letters home. And that was the beginning of Black Americans really coming to Paris to check it out. So going back 100 years, now 120 years, there's been a history of Black Americans coming to Paris. And the history is usually people who are artists, writers, musicians, singers, performers. And to me, that class of people have always been what I consider the thinkers in our race, the activists, the people who live and think outside the box. And during that time, if you had the wherewithal to put together your nuggets and get on a ship and go across an ocean, you were different. You were different. Not even like the immigrants we think of today. You were the real renegades. You know, Josephine Baker, you know, has a comment where she said, you know, I didn't want to leave America, but, you know, it was so hard. You know, we're hated here. And it's like, why are you going to stay in a country where you are hated?
Yes.
And for the people who left 100 years ago, that was the experience. That was the experience. And not unlike the people who packed up in the South and moved north, there was the crowd who packed up and moved across an ocean.
Yes.
That's a different group. That's a different kind of thinking. Those are the risk takers. And those are the people I find interesting and appealing.
Yeah, I completely understand. When you move to a completely other country, you are taking a risk that is just not the same as if you moved from Texas to New York or something like this. It's a completely different risk.
It's a break. It's a real break.
Yeah, it's a real break. Let's talk a little bit about your family history and your mom being in the military and studying in Paris. That's so interesting to have that family history.
I had no idea that my mother had been to Paris until after she died, and my brother found a newspaper clip among her things that talked about her studying French, or taking education courses at a university in Paris. But my mother joined the military during World War II. She was smart. She got a little scholarship after high school to go to Hampton University, but she ran out of money, moved to New York, like millions of people were moving north. She was originally from Danville, Virginia, um, and took advantage of the opportunity at the time to join the military. Mary McLeod Bethune, the great Black educator, was a good friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. And during World War II, there weren't that many people joining the army. So there was a real push to get folk to join the army. And Mary McLeod Bethune said to Eleanor Roosevelt, why don't you talk to your husband about recruiting Black women into the military? The WACs had been created, the Women's Auxiliary Corps had been created in 1943. And Eleanor Roosevelt, I guess, talked to FDR, and a battalion of Black women were recruited to go to Europe and sort the mail, soldiers for American soldiers. So my mother joined the military. Based on an IQ test, she was selected for officer training school. So she became a lieutenant and was promoted at some point to captain, and had these wonderful stories to tell about being in the military. And my favorite being when she went to see Charles de Gaulle after the war. And my mother was always a character. You know, she was always the jokester character. And she's standing in the back of the line and she takes out her military pass and she starts waving. And it goes, press, press coming through, press coming through. So people parted to let her up front. And one of the Germans saw her and he said, you know, that does not look like a press pass. So he went up to her and he pulled her out of line and he said, let me see your press pass. So she showed him her military ID. And he was so impressed with her chutzpah that he took her up on stage with all the other dignitaries who were sitting on stage. And from what I could gather, he put her in his seat. And she was sitting on stage when de Gaulle came up to speak. And there were newsreels at the time, and this was all being shot. So every weekend after that, she would go to the movies with her girlfriends, waiting for this newsreel that showed her sitting on stage while de Gaulle was speaking.
Wow.
That was just my mother. She was just, you know, that type.
Have you seen this video?
No. And I have a friend, he's since passed away, a man named Leroy Woodson, who's actually a military historian. And he did tell me how I could track it down. I just never did. But he said, look, if a newsreel was done, it exists somewhere.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And it's, for me, I was, you know, I've heard of this, what is it, the 6888th Postal Battalion?
Yes.
Yeah, that I've heard of this for a long time. And I always found it totally fascinating. And it's kind of interesting to meet someone who has a direct relationship to this battalion. It's really awesome.
I learned more about the battalion after my mother died and doing the book, you know, doing the research. And my parents would tell the story of how they met, but you know, when you're a kid, you get it all confused. And, you know, it was something about they were in a warehouse jumping up and down on a mattress. You know, that's the
yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was like not a story a child would be like, yeah, okay, mom and dad, like you met, blah, 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 you know?
I mean, I remember the Charles de Gaulle story because I just thought that was great.
Yeah. And your father is an immigrant.
Yes.
Or was an immigrant. Yeah.
Yes, from St. Croix, the Virgin Islands. And my mother was Southern from Virginia, and they were just two different types. My father, you know, his brothers were these Harlem outlaws, you know, the number runners and the owners of the gambling dens. And the first day he came to New York, he was the youngest of 6 boys. He was arrested with his brothers because the cops had done a sweep in Harlem of all the numbers dens. So here he is with this brother, and the cops come in and he's arrested with them. And he's horrified because my father, as one of my uncles would always say, you're such a snob. But my father was like, oh my God, you know. but he was fierce and strong like his brothers. West Indian men I have always liked because they just have, to me, a quality that's a little different, can be exasperating, but a little different from Americans. They too took a risk and left their country to come somewhere else. So my father represented what I considered that strong Black power, Black pride. My mother was a little more acquiescent, coming from the segregated South. So it made for interesting dynamic.
Yeah, you tell a story about something that happened in St. Croix with white soldiers coming to the island. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, St. Croix had been owned by the Danes. And I actually went to St. Croix in 2016. I had been there years before, but I went as a grown person, and it was a kind of a junket. And one of the things I found out, the Virgin Islands had been owned over the last 500 years by 19 different European countries. And the last European country were the Danes, the Danish. They sold the islands to the United States in 1917. My father was about 10 years old. So here come these white soldiers. In 1917, you know what life was like for Blacks in America. So here come these white soldiers who, it's like, oh, a Black island. We don't have to respect these people. They were shooting up the town. They were raping the women, just carrying on. And my father remembers distinctly his father, my grandfather, having a group of men come into his house for a meeting to talk about how we're going to deal with these soldiers. And he doesn't remember, what was talked about, but the next night, a soldier was found with his throat cut. And the night after that, another soldier was found with his throat cut. And this went on for about a week, which was long enough for that behavior to stop. It just stopped. So whenever my father told that story, and he told it all the time, and I loved it every time he told it, he would just say, and that nonsense stopped.
Yeah. My grandfather told a similar, not the exact same, but a similar type story. My family is originally from Texas, and Texas, even though it was a slave state, it's got a lot of different people. I mean, there's people from Mexico, there's Native Americans, there's a lot of African Americans there. And in this same kind of, early 20th century time period, yeah, I mean, everybody in Texas had guns. And that's how they would solve problems too, when white people got out of hand. So yeah, it's maybe sometimes the only way. But I love that story. Very, very good. Yeah, I took so many notes from this book. I almost feel embarrassed now. I took so many notes.
Thank you so much.
So you're not a permanent resident in France?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Yeah. You told a story in the book about talking to a woman who went, was it you that went to the office for immigration or whatever, and it was such a terrible nightmare?
That was Pat.
That was Pat. Oh yes, that's right. It was Pat.
There were a few people, expats that I interviewed for the book, and she was one of them. And I interviewed her the day that she had just come from the immigration office. And I guess it was the final interview, and she was exhausted. And it's the recurring story, the worldwide story of trying to get a green card wherever you are in the world. And for her, trying to get a green card in France was just excruciating. She didn't speak the language. The first time she went with an interpreter. The French didn't let the interpreter come in. So she's trying to negotiate and trying to go through a process, not being able to speak the language. And one of the things I was struck by, and I really, I so admired Pat because she's older. She came to a city where she didn't know anyone and didn't speak the language. And I'm like thinking, oh my God, I could never do that. I could never do that. So it was inspiring to see how this woman navigated a system that's tough under the best of circumstances. It's tough for people who do speak the language. But she made a comment, and I found it interesting because Black Americans, we have a view that's not always entirely culturally accurate. And she said, I was having a hard time, and I was just thinking, how much harder must it be for, these Africans and people of color from other parts of the world. And I'm thinking, but those folk speak French. So at least they have a major hurdle that's been overcome.
Yes. Yes. I read what you wrote, and I thought, yeah, that's true. Like, we somehow as Americans, I mean, okay, we're part of the empire. Even though we're African American, we're still a part of the empire. And so it gives us this attitude like we're above it all, like we should be automatically ushered in somehow, even though we might not speak the language or know anything about what's going on.
Well, what we are as Black Americans, and it's probably true for whites also, we're privileged. If you are a Black American who has decided to come to Paris, at least now, in the 21st century and the latter part of the 20th century, you're someone of means. You're not being smuggled in by boat. You're getting on a plane, you're getting on a jet with your ticket, and you're flying into another country. You already are heads above most folk, just by the fact that you can do that. And I think we don't talk about that kind of privilege. But yeah, if you're an expat now, you're a person of privilege. You're either coming to work for an American corporation or maybe a French corporation. You're coming to study. I have an older friend who came, she's got 3 or 4 degrees, but she came to go to the American University of Paris, not to get another degree, but to just be in an environment where she could learn about art. She wanted to be in Paris, but she had the means to do that.
Yes.
And that's what we have. And I think we should acknowledge that because it does give us, certain power.
Yes. Oh, for sure. It's not even, that's really true. And I mean, as an American in Germany, I basically just showed up and said, I want to live here. And then they're like, yes, come in, please live here. So, I mean, when other people, it's an ordeal to get the ability to come here, whether you have the money or not. If you're from what people consider a developing country, it's going to be a lot harder.
Right.
I have to say, you wrote about tiny apartments and how you began to love Facebook and show off all of your tiny apartments.
I'm sitting in one now. Doesn't it look great?
Oh my God, that's a tiny apartment. It looks so huge and spacious.
Because my ex-roommate and my dear friend Jo Lowry is a designer. She's got a great design. She built all of the bookcases you see in the back. And
Wow.
I just love it.
Yeah, that's really, my husband can attest to this. I'm kind of obsessed with tiny houses and tiny apartment spaces. And you should, if you really wanted to continue, there's a lot of YouTube channels that do like video tours of little apartments. Maybe you should think about that.
Oh yeah.
It's a popular genre.
Oh, I love it. No. I watch HGTV. That's the house, home decorating channel in the States. But this apartment is about 360 square feet, which is by American standards, tiny.
Yeah, well, for sure. That is true. It is tiny. But I just was so like, that sort of thrilled me. Like, oh, she likes tiny houses, just like me.
I'm 5'10", so.
So you don't like cold winters.
No,
That's something that you kept saying, like you wrote it at least 4 times in the book.
I opened with it because
Yeah.
first, I mean, January 18th, 19th, when I arrived, was the beginning of the coldest winter in Europe in 30 years. And my apartment was really tiny. It was about 200 square feet. And the source of heat was a space heater. And I was like, am I going to make it? And it also rains in Paris. And I'm originally from the Washington State, Seattle area where it rains every other day. And I kept thinking if I wanted to be in rain, I would have stayed in Seattle. So both of the cold and the wet rain were just shocking to me, just shocking.
So you think it's colder in France than it is in like Brooklyn?
It's not colder. See, what New York has, people don't understand. Brooklyn, New York City, it gets a lot of sun. So even if it's cold, we have lots of sunny days. I actually looked it up, and we have more sunny days in San Diego. So, because I did a Facebook post on that. So even if it's cold, if the sun is out, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to argue you off at this point because I live in Germany and I moved here from Florida. So
Oh my goodness.
so there's no sun and it's very cold, but I just found it an interesting thing. Like you really didn't like the cold weather.
No,
Not at all.
Patricia LaPlante, bless her heart, she's the one who said to me early on, she said, if you can do Paris in the winter, you can do Paris. And I guess after my second year, I said, you know what, I really can't do Paris in the winter.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. I just want to turn to the chapter. It was a place to be somebody. That's chapter 12. And you talked about going to going to the American University to see a film screening of Maynard. And that was actually a Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus event. And I have a couple of pictures of you at the event that I was also at this event because it was there. You came late, so you missed me speaking.
There was a program before. I knew, okay.
No, it's okay. I'm not, Abraham Lincoln or something. So don't feel like you missed something.
For that whole program, but the traffic was so awful getting there.
Yes, it was. You had a great experience with the cab driver, Fidel.
Yes.
And I had the exact opposite, but I just want to share with everybody. If you see, there's Audrey in the picture right there. And I did not know who she was at the time. And there's another picture. I was just taking pictures of general, the audience and people who came there. And then here's Audrey again speaking with Tanis Williams, who actually helped us arrange the Maynard film screening and getting the Maynard Jackson family here. So yeah, this was like a little memory road for me from your book. I found it kind of great. So thank you for letting me share those pictures. We just got a few more minutes, and I wanted to talk about Michelle Obama. Yeah, and how many people in Paris felt like you looked your statuesque and tall and beautiful like Michelle Obama.
One person, the sales girl in Printemps, which is a posh department store. I went to this, the whole winter, my first winter, I just didn't go out. It was gloomy. I didn't go shopping. Everybody comes to Paris for the shopping. But when I tried to live in Paris in 2007, I couldn't wear the French clothes. I'm 5'10". I could wear the shoes, oddly enough. I could find clothes that fit, but I couldn't find clothes that fit. So after this wretched winter, I went shopping with Joe, my roommate, sitting Hi, Joe. And her friend Peggy. And these are two cute little white ladies. And we went shopping and they're trying on clothes and I'm trying on clothes and nothing fit. And then we went to the designer floor. So the elevator opens, we step off, and here comes this tall, willowy sales girl who had to be about 25. And she comes running up. She goes, "Oh, Michelle Obama, you are like Michelle Obama." And I'm looking around, I'm going, who's she talking to?
You.
And I'm like, is she kidding? And she wasn't. So she starts bringing me all of these clothes, everything fit, Diane von Furstenberg, of course they're gonna fit, they cost, thousands of dollars. So everything I tried on, I'm posing and she's like just gushing, "Oh, you have the height, you have the charisma, you are like Michelle Obama." And I said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm gonna buy everything you show me." So she kept bringing clothes and I kept trying them on, and then I had selected what I wanted, which was something like 2,000 euros, which was about, I don't know, $3,000 in a minute. I'm like, and she kept saying, repeating, same thing. It's like, okay, I'm getting a little, so as she's getting ready to say it again, I said, "Sweetheart, two things I don't have. I don't have Michelle Obama's man, and I don't have her $60 million book advance."
Yeah.
Buying any of these. And then Joe and Peggy and I went across the street to Uniqlo, and I bought sweatpants for €9. And they fit too, they fit perfectly.
Awesome. That is a really great story.
So flattering. And what was amazing to me was how the Obamas made among the French. Because I'm thinking this little sales girl had to be a kid when Barack Obama was elected president. And she was just, enamored of the two of them. She's just enamored. And again, it said something about the French, what they deem important and how they view African Americans and how they view our culture.
Yes. Yes. Your book was an absolute amazing tale that I would love to read more of. Definitely read more about, to encourage you to write more. Now that Trump is no longer president, how do you feel about living in the United States now?
Not good, not good. Because what Trump did was unleash forces that are very disturbing. I think in many ways we are witnessing the beginning of the fall of the American empire. And I can remember saying back in college, and I don't know why I would say it, but I would say, I do not want to be in the belly of the beast when it goes down. I've been saying that for years. And I think we're witnessing the beast about to go down. May not happen in our lifetime, but I think it's been set in motion. I think it's been set in motion. And what Trump has unleashed are the forces of racism and misogyny and homophobia and classism. And social media, well, that's what's different now. Social media has unleashed a kind of negative energy that has no regard for truth, no regard for the humanity of all of us. To have these great deniers who are living in a parallel universe, who believe that Trump really won. And when his presidency was first, not presidency, but when he was first running, was talked about, I thought it was ridiculous. And I have a friend in New York who's so worried that he's coming back in 2024.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going, that's ridiculous. And then I said, you know what? You said that in 2016. So I'm just disturbed that things have gotten worse. I mean, the government seems to be in free fall. Congress is, for all intents and purposes, dysfunctional. I liked Biden from the beginning because he was the only one who really didn't want to run. He wasn't running on ego. He really wanted to do some good. But he has, the jackals, hounding at him. He has the press tearing him apart. And I just feel that America has lost its way, and I don't know if it can find its way back.
Well,
Thank you so much, both Audrey and Angela. Now we are at the audience question segment. So Sarah S. has a question for you, Audrey.
I think I'm unmuted.
You're up.
Hi, Audrey.
Yeah. Mhm.
I also live in Paris, and thank you. I do not know you, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book. And while you were speaking, I looked up in the American Library to see if your book was there, and it's not. So I would like to propose, this is what I did with my book. I walked it down to the American Library, and I met the woman who does the author events in the evenings, and they took my book and they scheduled me. And I would like to propose the same for you, that we walk down with a copy of your book and donate it to the library. I will introduce you to Alice, and we'll get you scheduled to speak at the American Library, where you can bring boxes and boxes of your books for sale, and you can autograph them. I think you'd be a huge success.
Well, you know what? Thank you. I have actually, a gentleman named Patrick Banks has been in touch with me and has already proposed that I do something at the American Library in February during Black History Month. So,
Okay,
motion.
so I was preempted.
I need all the help I can get, but
You got my help. They love me there, so
Wonderful.
they love me there. So anything I can do to help you, thank you.
yes, no, thank you. What I
Thank you, Sarah.
this is my 7th book. It's the only book I've done that I self-published, and there's a whole other book about having 3 agents who didn't get it to publishers, having publishers who did see early versions, like 2 and 3 chapters. And I just decided I'm going to do this myself. So I called in someone who had an independent press, and he got it out before the election. That was key. And then I met with a publisher who wanted to do it early on. This was the one publisher who wanted to do it, Akashic Press, but they're a small independent publisher, and they couldn't meet they had an early deadline that I couldn't meet because I was writing it as I was living it. But I had lunch with her, managing editor of the press, and she said, I told her I've sold over 500 copies. And she said, she said, first of all, the fact that you got this out in 2020 is miraculous. The fact that you got it out before the election is miraculous. That many of our authors didn't come close in 2020 to selling 500 copies. Many of the printers went under. I had dinner with a bigger publisher who said many of our books got backlogged because the printers couldn't handle, everything shut down during COVID. So I came away from both of those dining experiences really gratified that I had done it the way I did it. And I've just been astounded by the reaction. I mean, participating in this to me is just so, it's so wonderful. It's so empowering. And it told me, if you have a story, and I come out of magazine publishing, so I knew how to do it. I knew the people I needed to help me. I needed a designer, I needed copy editors. I knew all of that. But I also realized, given the reaction, that I had a good story to tell. And it was a story that I felt strongly about telling because I knew this man. One of the agents, I love it. One of the agents said, well, don't focus on Trump because he's not really going to be a factor for that long. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And I just knew instinctively, man, this is the beginning of the end in many ways. So I'm so happy that I followed my instincts, that I pulled it together. And it's been, I call myself retired, semi-retired, but it's just been wonderful work. It's just been wonderful. And having people who get it, who understand it, who like it, who want me to speak about it, all of that's just been gravy. I'm so appreciative. I'm so appreciative to you. Thank you.
Well, we're grateful that you followed your instinct and that we have this that we can discuss and read. We have two more questions that are lined up, one from Cuthbert and, first from Connie. Connie actually asked if you could read the opening page of your book, which is a really great opening. But actually, maybe we should hear Cuthbert's question and then then we can hear you read, if that's okay. Would you? Yeah. Cuthbert?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hope I said your
Say-
name right.
Yeah. I said I've I've seen some films made by filmmakers from Senegal about the French in Senegal and the French in Africa and things. And there was a film about where a woman was in Senegal and then some French family came down and then had her work for them, cleaning their house and things like that. And then they wanted her to come back with them back to France. And then she went up there and then they treated her like an animal or something, you know, they just really treated her very, very poorly. And and there've been a number of films about things about France and Africa and how their colonial mentality was just very, really horrible. And even times today where they try to control all the money that some of the French former colonies, when they want to deal with the global market, they have to go through France, you know, and all these kinds of things. And recently we had the thing about Algeria here has a conflict now with France over the military, I think it is, or some sort of recent conflict here. Do you see these sort of things going on in Paris? How does France look at its colonial history? Does it have any kind of show any kind of admission that what they did was horrible, or their past crimes? Do they face anything about the past?
No, I will tell you something. What I do admire about first, let me start by saying I did not get into France's colonial history with its colonized people. One, because I don't speak the language. Therefore, and I don't know the history. So I didn't feel qualified to even give much of an assessment. What I did say is that French colonialism is very different from American racism. And it's not to say one is better, one is less onerous or less oppressive, but they're different. What I like about the French is that they, in my opinion, have an ability to own their sins. America has yet to do that. Not only can't America own its sins, it doesn't want to talk about sins. This whole critical race theory, that's all about we don't want to be reminded of what we've done. Don't. And as long as you have that kind of attitude, there can never be any racial healing. There can never be redemption. There can never be absolution. So America as a nation and a culture still has its head in the sand and butt in the air, even more so than 50 years ago. France, on the other hand, and these are little things I note, but I think they make a difference. I remember when Macron said he was pledging to return the thousands of pieces of art that had been stolen from Africa under its colonial conquests. The fact that Toussaint L'Ouverture is in the pantheon, and this is a Black man, an ex-slave, who defeated Napoleon. Josephine Baker is about to be installed in the pantheon. So the French, to me, at least recognize that we have committed atrocities. We've committed atrocities. And no one denies that they have not done that. But the fact that they will own it, to me, they earn my respect in a way that America does not, because America does not even want to talk about it. And they get angry. And, you know, they were going to deny tenure to, God, I'm like, you know what I'm talking about. Nicole, I I can't believe I'm blanking on her name. But the issue in America is we don't want to talk about it. America hasn't even apologized for slavery. They haven't even apologized. And this is every administration. And it just says something about the mindset of a culture that won't atone, just won't. So that to me makes the French, head and shoulders above the Americans.
But did they have slavery in France itself on
No, that's the other difference. That's the other difference.
Because France did participate in the slave trade and transported hundreds of thousands of Africans across the Atlantic.
Colonies. It had slaves in the Caribbean.
Right.
And slavery in the Caribbean was awful. It rivaled anything that American slavery had. It was awful. It was awful. But there was never slavery on French soil. And the difference between America is a land of newcomers. The indigenous people were pretty much wiped out. So the white Europeans who settled in America are newcomers, just as the black slaves that they brought from Africa were newcomers. So here you have a vast land that runs from one ocean to another ocean, populated by people who came, took over the land, and then went to Africa and took people to work the land. Very different history, very different circumstances.
Just my last quick question. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's also a rise in the far right in France now. There's a woman that leads the far right party. I forget her name right off.
Marie Le Pen.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems that there's also a rise in the far right extremists as there is in the US going on in France.
Well, the difference is Marine Le Pen did not win in the last election. Trump did. So yes, she was far right and she didn't win. Macron won. Now, I don't know much about Macron other than the fact that I think he's cute and he married a woman 24 years older than him. So to me, he's kind of cool. But that's the extent of my French politics. But I think it's instructive and it's important and insignificant that the far right did not win in 2017. Which to me, again, says something about the French people.
I have another question. Thanks for going down that road, Audrey. I know it's a tricky place to go because it's not that you're romantic. It's not that you're excusing France. It's not that you're saying that it's a perfect place, but it was and is a sanctuary for you at a turning point in American history and at a turning point in your life. And that's what I want to ask you about. What was it like to mine your personal history? Like, you're a journalist, and an editor. What was it like to go into your own life and to write about your own life, and also to, in that process, even reveal some discoveries that you had about your family, like about your mother, things that you discovered about your mother after she had passed? What was that like for you emotionally? What was that process like as a writer?
I will tell you something, Joy. I've always done that as a reporter, writer. When I was at Essence, I wrote many, many stories. I was the person who wrote about sex. I was the person who wrote about relationships. And they were often very personal. They would start with a personal intro and then get into a larger discussion. So I've never been uncomfortable doing that. I've never written about my parents the way I did. And I'm one of those people, I know lots of people who say, I have a wonderful story about my family. My family is this and my family is that. And I guess I never had that kind of ego. So it wasn't until one of the agents said to me, the book was pretty much done. And she said, you haven't said anything about your background and your family. And that's when I did that chapter. So I was prompted by someone else to do it. And I was really glad I did. And then I was kind of sorry I didn't do it when my parents were alive. And I can remember my mother, because my mother is such a pistol. And I remember when I was, journalist reporter, she would say, well, my friends want to know, why you haven't written about me? And I'm like, well, nah, I don't know. I don't have that kind of ego. So I am sorry she's not alive to see the book, because she would love the chapter about her. But yeah, so I'm not uncomfortable writing about me, but I've never really thought about writing about the bigger me, which is the family. And the book forced me to do that.
One thing I've learned from this process of doing the Lit Festival, as I was saying, is how many writers are among us. Do you have any advice for writers who are undertaking a project that is historical, personal, also current? It's like you have all of these different threads going. You've got the history, the personal history, the US history, and then French history. So what advice do you have on juggling all of those different threads?
Nobody is going to write about history the way I did, but I tell any writer to tell your truth. I think you have to be honest as a writer. You have to look at the good, you have to look at the bad, you have to look at the ugly. And that's not always easy to do. But if you don't tell your truth, if it's not authentic, readers can spot that. And I think you have to respect your reader and write with the knowledge that if you tell the truth, people will respect it. They may not like it, they may not agree with it, but you have to be true to yourself. When I was at Essence, I worked with a Senegalese writer, Jibril Diallo, who was with the UN, and he grew up in a polygamous family. His father had 4 wives, and he did a piece for us on that. And he still to this day, this was over 20 years ago, he still to this day will say to me, Audrey, I will never forget, you told me if you're going to write, you have to be willing to bleed on the page, which is just a, graphic way of saying, tell the truth, the good truth, the bad truth, but tell the truth. And it frees you as a writer, and it also directs you as a writer and guides you.
Wow.
That's how I try to operate.
Oh, it's clear. It's definitely clear. Do we have any more questions for Audrey?
I have a question.
Yes, Connie.
First of all, Audrey, thank you so, so much. And I feel a little frivolous asking you to read the first page.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
In fact,
I didn't think to bring.
You brought up very deep issues that do require a lot of thinking, a lot of thought, and a lot of conversation. And I'd just like to say that the Democrats Abroad France Diversity Caucus, even well before you arrived and still, has had extraordinary conversations about race, about identity in France, about colonialism. And thanks to, Reed Kennedy and Veronica Pollard and Joe Dreyfus have brought in some very interesting personalities to talk about that. And it's wonderful that you were able to just bring up the little things that you just brought up to us in this conversation, talking about your book. And hi, Joe. Joe Lowry is one of our Democratic patriots. Hi. But it's true that I always have a fascination when a writer reads a little bit of his or her own book. So first of all, thank you for the conversation that you just had with us.
Well, thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. You want
and maybe just in closing, you don't have to do that now if there's more people have other questions, but maybe in closing you read yourself in your own voice so we can hear the author herself.
That's a great idea, Connie. Why don't we go ahead and do it now? If you're ready, Audrey, we can read a bit and hear Audrey read a bit. And then if someone has one last question after the reading.
Fine. This is from the prologue called Taking Off. Running has historically been a revolutionary move and valuable skill in my community, a community of people in America who were enslaved for 240 years, physically brutalized, sexually abused, legally discriminated against, killed at will. Historically, we had good and noble reasons to run, to save our lives, reclaim our spirits, be free. Still, the last thing I expected to be doing at this stage of life as a free Black woman was running with a swiftness, as in bolting, heading for the hills, getting out of Dodge, which in my case meant flying nonstop to Paris to sit out what I knew was going to be the chaos of a new American political order under a new old president. Paris, that incomparable city of light, has historically offered refuge and reprieve to generations of African Americans running to its shores since the early 1900s, seeking asylum from the darkness that has always characterized the insanity of American racism. I was seeking refuge from the darkness of one Donald J. Trump, who embodied the old insanity when I fled America 2 days before he was to be inaugurated as the country's 45th president. Now, this book did not start out to be about Donald Trump, and really it is not, though of course in many ways it is, because he is the reason I became an American runaway at this later stage in my life's history. Whatever the endowment of Donald Trump's presidency, his tenure has transformed American politics forever and forced me, an American woman of a certain age and of the media, a writer and journalist, cultural observer, and upfront activist thinker, to consider what it means to be Black and female in the age of Trump. Never in the history of the Republic has there been a president who represents so vile a media villain for his particular age. The first gangster Dome, who just keeps on shooting, spewing his toxic load to a pumped up press and consuming public. He is every pundit, soundbite dream, and terrifying fake news nightmare. That's it.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you for reading that.
I have to say, one of my, you asked about writing personal, and there, this is the beginning. One of my girlfriends said, well, I gotta say, you don't mind telling your business. And I'm like, where did I tell my business? So I went back to look and I said, oh, okay. But again, if you're gonna tell the truth, it means you gotta tell your business.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think there are any parts of your life that you would never put in a book, that you'd never put down? Yeah, yeah. So boundaries are important. Yeah,
Does that?
that's right. That's right. Does anyone else have questions? I have more I can ask if, okay, so do you think that without Trump, one thing that's happened is like Trump becomes like this figurehead of evil. But do you think that without him, you would have made this trip anyway, that you would have made this move? Do you think you would have seen something in America that was not, good for you personally? Yeah.
You know what, Joy, I have often said, what would I be doing if Hillary Clinton was president?
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I did before the election was buy a condo, because I do real estate. I'm a real estate broker and I love real estate investing. So I bought a condo in Atlanta with the idea of having, and I've always had second homes, the idea of having a winter home in Atlanta. And I have often thought, wow, if Hillary Clinton was president, I'd be in Atlanta in January, February, and March. I've also thought, if Hillary Clinton was president, I don't think we'd have over 500,000 people dead from COVID. So I've often thought about what life would have been like had history gone another way in terms of the election. And I've always loved Paris, but after trying to retire here in 2007 and that didn't work, no, I would not have moved to Paris. That would not have, I would have continued to visit, but no. His election turned, for me in my life, everything around. I didn't plan to do a book. I had done, I've done several books. I had another book in mind about being a Black baby book. That was sort of an idea, but no, he turned my life around completely and continues to do so. And I think people, everybody talks about what the effect of COVID has been, and it's been tremendous on everybody, but what people don't talk about is what would life look like if someone else had been managing that crisis and not Trump.
Do you think the writing of the book helped you process this transition in your life?
Absolutely. And I have to say, it's been the best phase of my life. I'm in my 70s now. When I came to Paris in 2017, that year I turned 70. And it's been the best time of my life because I've been free to do what I want. I wrote a book I wanted to write. I published a book that nobody else would publish. I promoted a book not knowing I knew how to promote anything. So it's been totally empowering, totally.
And it's empowering to hear you speak about it. Now, I just also want to mention that though Audrey self-published and has done so much of the work, the book has also gotten coverage in some major news outlets. It's been covered in mentioned in the New York Times, in the Washington Post as well. So, it's definitely an inspiring read, but also the process of the making, and hearing and learning about the process of the making is inspiring as well.
Joy, I'm glad Connie mentioned Veronica Pollard and Joel Dreyfus, who are long time friends of mine. And it was Veronica who sent me an email when the columnist in the New York Times did a whole column on will people leave America if Trump gets reelected? And she had read my book. My publisher sent her a copy of the book. He overnighted it. So for this columnist to say, Audrey Edwards has written an amazing collection of new essays, it was Veronica who sent me an email that was probably, I don't know, the time difference. I think I got it at 4 o'clock in the morning. And she said, wow, this is what this columnist said about you. That's how I found out it was in the Times. And I'm like, oh my God. And people killed to get reviewed in the Times. And I was so fortunate that the writer of this column loved the book and did a column about it, and then did a Facebook post saying, I'm doing a column about this amazing book. And I'm going, oh my goodness. So I don't know that big publishers could have gotten the kind of promotion that the book got. And so much of it had to do with the people I knew and the people who helped. Because you can't do this. This is not a solo undertaking by any means. It's just not.
We have a question from Angela Shaw.
Well, really, it's a thank you to Audrey, and a little note. Audrey, you might want to see Joycelyn Moody, Cambridge University Press, published her book September 23rd, A History of African American Autobiography.
Oh, wow.
Like 400 pages. So it's just on African American autobiography.
Yeah.
And you might find that
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for putting me onto that. Yeah.
No, I want to thank you for writing such an excellent book
Oh, thank you.
and for appearing at this literary festival.
This
You are
has been
so
such an
gracious.
honor. This has been such an honor.
You're so gracious and so polite in so many
Oh,
ways.
are you kidding?
Oh, yes, in so many ways, you have been very gracious. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You're very welcome, but I feel honored. I'm really, really honored. And I'm a big Facebook poster, and Kathleen Demeron, who I'm sure everyone knows, head of the Sister Circle in Paris, sent me, Joy, the press release that you put out. And I put it on Facebook, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna put this on Facebook. Well, it got such reaction. I'm like, oh my goodness. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the, because I'm now international.
Well, you were international before. It's our honor to have you here. We thank you again, Audrey Edwards, and I also want to thank Angela Fobbs for the wonderful conversation. Once again, this conversation with Audrey Edwards is a part of our Global Women's Caucus Feminist Literary Festival. We have events all month. Tomorrow, we will have Carla Power in conversation with Ann Kratz. Carla Power is a Pulitzer and National Book Award nominee. The conversation is sure to be a treat. Then every Friday throughout the month, I'm hosting a writing drop-in, which I think Sarah S. mentioned in the chat. If you want to come, put pen to paper, do some writing with us. That is always a great time. Well, it has been a great time so far. Friday was our first one. And then at the end of the month, we have Diane Johnson in conversation with Alan Writing. We also have an Octavia Butler appreciation evening coming up, which I'm really excited about, where I'll be talking about Octavia Butler's work, and we'll
Also
see
have
some
Connie and
clips.
Sheila.
And
We
we
also
also
have
have, yes, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we also have Connie and Sheila doing a Simone de Beauvoir webinar coming next Monday, actually. So thank you all again. Check out Audrey's book. You can find it on Amazon. And a link to it is also on our on the event page for this event. If you want to RSVP for any of the events, the web address is democratsabroad.org/WC. If you go there, you'll see a tab that says a button that says Feminist Literature Festival, and it has each of the events. You would need to RSVP to whichever ones you want to attend. Thanks again. Enjoy your afternoon. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
All right, guys. Don't forget to stop the recording, Joy.